In today's gospel, what we have is we have the Jesus and his public ministry. He started his public ministry. John the Baptist, who baptized him in the River Jordan, has now been arrested because he said to the king, "You cannot have your brother's wife as your own." And so the king didn't particularly like that, so he put them into prison. And now John the Baptist is there in prison. So the question is, when he sends the emissaries with the question, "Are you who's the one to come? Do we look for another?" Is he saying it for himself? Because after all, has reason to question because he's in prison. Or is he sending it because he sees the disciples' faith being lessened by this? But either way, what we have is that idea of doubt. And one thing that John the Baptist does that's good is that he sends them to Jesus. Too many times today, what you have is that you have people who have doubts over church teaching. And so rather than use those doubts, those questions to look into and develop a deeper understanding, they just kind of persist in those doubts. So I'm open-minded. I'm not, I just have doubts about this or that. And so what John the Baptist does is that he sends them to Jesus. And the one thing that was good in our seminary is we had a church history teacher who taught us that you have to look at what the original author said. You can't look at what somebody else said about them and their own biases, but you have to look at what they said themselves. And so when he sends them to Jesus, what does he do? He doesn't say, "Yep, I'm the one." But what he does is that he says, take a look around, see and understand that the blind get their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have the good news proclaimed to them. So take a look around, see what's happening, and don't persist in the doubt. And so that's a good thing. The other thing about is that idea of disappointment. Many times we have the situation where, maybe we've done a lot of things good in our church, a lot of things good for the Lord, and yet there's a setback. It could be financial, it could be relationship-wise, it could be health-wise, all these different things it could be. And so the natural tendency is to say, well, okay, why, Lord? Why me? Why am I in this situation? Why am I feeling bad, or, having a bad relationship, or, having children that I raised in the faith now deserting the faith or going to another faith or whatever, or no faith at all. Why is that the case? And so the one thing about disappointment that I learned early on in a Christian life is that disappointments, God is never disappointed with us. And that kind of seems kind of odd, but it's true, because one of the things about disappointments is that disappointment's based on, you have an expectation of someone. You say, okay, my friend is going to help me to do this. And then they don't do it, or they have this really lame excuse, and you feel really disappointed because you had that expectation that they're coming through and they did not. The one thing about God is that God doesn't have any of those kind of expectations of us. God knows us through and through. So there's no expectation that is, going to be unfulfilled. It's not that God is pleased with everything we do, certainly not. But again, that idea that God is never disappointed with us. And so what do we do then with those ideas of doubt and disappointment in our life? And I think, as we've said, that doubt, to look into it, to see, to understand, to use those doubts as a means of bringing us to a deeper and a closer relationship with God. So look into those situations, see what the church teaching has to say. The other one is disappointment, is to realize that it can bring us to a closer relationship. Even the difficult things in life, even the tough things, can sometimes bring us to a better relationship with God. As we bring it to prayer, as we bring it before the Lord, as we lay it out before the Lord, we can come to an even deeper relationship with God. So the one thing is that carrying that cross, it can bring us to that deeper relationship. And so one of the things about today in this particular gospel is those idea of doubt and disappointment can indeed bring us to that idea of preparation that is truly the statement of Advent. Advent is that time of preparation. And so whether if we have doubts, whether we have disappointments, using that as a time of prayer, as a time of learning, as a time of discernment to help us to bring ourselves closer to Christ this Christmas season. Thanks, and God bless.